Croatoan, one word, etched deep into splintered wood. No cries, no bodies, no final stand, just the ghost of something gone. When Governor John White returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, he expected to find his people hungry, desperate, perhaps, but alive. Instead, he found the colony emptied, erased, as if the land had opened its jaws and swallowed over 100 men, women, and children, including his own daughter, Eleanor, and his infant granddaughter, Virginia. No sign of violence, no scorched wood or shattered bones. Only that single word carved into a weathered post at the edge of the ruined Fort Croatoan. To this day, the disappearance of the Roanoke colonists remains America's oldest unsolved mystery. But beyond the speculation, beyond the archaeology, the forged stones, the shallow graves, lingers a deeper question. What does it mean to be truly lost, not just in body, but in history, in memory? Tonight, we journey back not through dusty textbooks or cold theories, but through the fading heartbeat of the lost survivor, through fear, hunger, madness, and silence, through the final footprints left in a land that never wanted to be found. Before we begin, if stories of forgotten people and unsettling truths speak to something quiet in you, subscribe. It helps us keep the past from vanishing completely. Chapter 1. The Last Light. The cold came early. Not the kind that bit fingers or frosted windows, but something deeper, something that crept beneath the skin and hollowed from within. It wrapped the Roanoke colony in stillness, pressing against the rough-hewn walls of their wooden fort like a breath held too long. There was no snow, just frost, just silence, the kind that makes you forget what warmth ever felt like. By the end of October 1587, the fires had grown smaller, and so had the people. They had arrived with ambitions. England's great dream of a foothold in the New World. Over 100 settlers, farmers, tradesmen, mothers heavy with child. They brought with them iron tools and paper promises, crosses for prayer, names for things that had already been named, but they had no wheat, no beasts, no real understanding of the land they now lived on. And by winter, the land was already saying no. It began with hunger. The natives, once cautiously welcoming, had vanished after an argument turned violent. An Englishman, desperate for food, struck an elder during a failed trade. That night, the forest began to change. No more visitors, no more fish, no more sound but the wind. Eleanor, daughter of Governor John White, had once believed in the colony. In the dream, she gave birth to her daughter, Virginia, the first English child born on American soil. That had felt like a beginning. But beginnings are quiet when endings come fast. By Christmas, the children had stopped playing. Some had stopped eating. A boy named Tobias walked into the woods one morning and was found the next day with his mouth filled with dirt. No signs of struggle, just cold fingers, wide eyes, and soil packed behind his teeth. They buried him shallow. The ground had grown too hard for depth. Then they started disappearing, one by one, and always quietly. Thomas Bryan went to fill a pail at the river and never returned. The pail was found, still upright, water reflecting the grey sky. Another woman, her face pale and glassy, left a note scrawled on a piece of bark. There are voices in the wind. She was never seen again. There were no bodies, no blood, just the feeling that something was watching, something that never needed to chase, only wait. Eleanor held Virginia tighter. The baby had grown thin, pale. She did not cry anymore, only blinked, slowly, like something half asleep. Eleanor fed her what she could, bits of root, drops of water, warmth from her own breath, but the infant grew quieter with each passing day. Some nights, Eleanor feared she'd already died in her arms and that she was too afraid to look. Marjorie Kett, the midwife, whispered that the land had judged them, that they had come where they were not welcome, that some places are not meant to be claimed. Eleanor didn't respond, but in her dreams she saw trees with mouths and rivers that whispered her name. They began burning furniture for heat, the chapel benches, doors, even Eleanor's cradle, built by her husband Ananias. He had vanished weeks ago, on a scouting trip beyond the tree line. Some said he ran, others said he was taken. Eleanor no longer hoped for explanations, only silence. Then, one by one, the settlers left. Amantimus, the carpenter, spoke to Eleanor before he went. "We're heading south," he said to Croatoan. "They say the people there are kind, that they take in those who need it." His voice trembled. "If he returns," he added, meaning Governor White, "we'll leave word." She nodded, hollow. "If," was all she said. That was the last voice she heard. A week later, she was alone. The fort was empty, its gates half collapsed, the tools rusting where they'd been dropped. Virginia had stopped breathing. Sometime in the night, Eleanor buried her with bare hands beneath a tree just outside the wall. No cross, no hymns, just a few lines of the Lord's Prayer muttered between sobs. She wrapped her child in the last piece of clean linen she had. Then she slept beside the grave and dreamed of fire. In the dream, the forest burned. But it wasn't smoke, she smelled it, was salt. And in the flames, a woman stood barefoot, her skin like bark, her eyes black as pitch. "You were warned," she said. Eleanor awoke to footsteps. She turned, but there was nothing. Just the trees, just the wind. And then she saw the word, carved into the gatepost, Croatoan. Not her hand, someone else's. The cuts were deep, jagged, rushed, but purposeful. A message or a warning, a direction maybe. But by then, there was no one left to read it. She sat beside it, numb. Her fingers traced the letters, and when her hands slipped, catching on the splintered wood, it bled. She didn't notice. She simply watched the tree line. And then, before the next morning, she vanished. Chapter 2. The Word That Remained. They came back to find ghosts. Not the kind that scream or linger in mirrors, but the kind made of absence. Of silence so deep, it presses against the chest and leaves no room for breath. In August of 1590, after 3 years lost to war and weather, Governor John White finally returned to Roanoke. He came expecting hardship, hunger, maybe, sickness, even death. But he did not expect nothing. The boats touched shore beneath a red dusk. Oars slid into water without splash, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. White's boots met the sand, and before the wind even shifted, he knew something had gone wrong. The trees were too still, the air too quiet. He and his men pushed forward, past the bluff, over the dunes, to the wooden palisade that once ringed the life he had left behind. It still stood, rotted at the base, splintered at the top, but whole. Inside, the houses had collapsed inward. Fire pits were filled with cold ash. The gardens were strangled with weeds. A doll's arm lay beneath a window. A rusted comb dangled from a beam above the chapel. But there were no graves, no bones, no blood, just the wind. And carved into the gatepost, faded but still legible, single word, Croatoan. There was no cross beside it, no sign of distress. That had been the plan, a symbol to mark if they'd been taken by force. But the cross wasn't there. Just the name of an island 50 miles south, home to the Croatoan people, Manteo's people, the ones who had once offered kindness, food, and wary alliance. White read the word aloud. It stuck in his throat. He told himself it meant hope. That they had gone willingly, that Eleanor, his daughter, had taken baby Virginia in her arms and sailed for safety, that they were still alive, somewhere past the trees, past the surf, living in peace. But the men searched, they called names into the woods, until their voices turned hoarse. They found no footprints, no trail, just a single shelter still standing, one used for council in the early days. Inside, carved into the beam beside the hearth, was something else. Not a word, a symbol, a spiral, scratched deep. Beneath it, a crude eye, and below that, long, uneven shapes like twisted teeth. White said nothing. He stared at the marks until dusk bled into night. They didn't stay long after that. On the ship that carried him back to England, White dreamed of Eleanor, not as he remembered her, but older, tired, gaunt, with wild hair and blackened nails. In the dream, she stood beneath a tree with red leaves, whispering something he could not hear. When he awoke, salt burned his eyes, and his hands were clenched so tightly his nails had drawn blood. He never returned to Roanoke. He died 10 years later, still drawing maps of the Carolina coast, still writing letters no one answered, still sketching Virginia's face from memory, always smaller, always fading, but the word remained, Croatoan. In the years that followed, stories began to bloom like mold. Some said the settlers had joined native tribes, their bloodlines absorbed, their names passed down like echoes. Explorers told of villages where children spoke broken English, of fair-haired warriors named Dare, Hewitt, Ananias, of old women who clutched iron crosses with no memory of how they came to have them. Others said darker things, that something had followed the colonists into the New World, something older than empire, something buried beneath the trees. The Croatoan people themselves told of it. In low voices, passed from mother to son, they spoke of spirits that walk in shadow, of settlers who arrived starving, eyes sunken, their dreams already cracked open. They were taken in, fed, housed, but sickness followed them, madness, hunger that did not end with food. One elder spoke of a woman with golden hair who stood by the fire and never blinked, who carved strange marks into trees at night, who whispered to the crows and sang in a tongue no one knew. The tribe fled inland soon after, not from the English, from what had claimed them. In 1937, a stone was found in the North Carolina woods, heavy, weathered, and carved with words that froze the scholars who read them. Ananias, Dare, and Virginia went hence unto heaven, 1591. The Englishman was slain with much misery. It was signed Ebud Eleanor, White Dare. More stones followed. Some were hoaxes, others questionable. But that first one, known now as the Dare Stone, remains debated even now. Some say it's real, a final testimony, a scream etched in granite. Others say it's just a story. But still, the island waits. Modern visitors say it feels off, the way the wind curves, the way the birds circle and never land. One traveler wrote, "It's not haunted, it's hollow." Another refused to speak of what he saw at dusk, just said that the trees moved like they were breathing. And always, there is the word Croatoan, scratched into walls before disappearances, found in posed notes, etched into rafters of hospitals long abandoned. It has become a myth, a cipher, a scar left by the unexplainable. But maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe the land simply took them one by one and left no trace, only a word. A message carved with the last of someone's strength. Not a direction, not a clue, but a memorial. Croatoan, the only name the land chose to keep.